Howdy folks, Chris Bianco here, part of the IBM Worldwide Enablement team, and I'd like to issue you a warm welcome to our part 2 of the Modernization of Business for Hybrid Cloud using Red Hat OpenShift Level 3 Learning. The series of hands-on tutorials and learning modules that are embedded in this Level 3 course are designed to provide our IBM Sellers, our Technical Sellers, and of course our business partners with the fluency to gain trusted advisor status with your clients and the expertise that you need to tailor live demonstrations such as the ones that you're going to be walking through as part of this curriculum in front of your own clients. In Modernizing Business for Hybrid Cloud Part 2, we're going to examine another persona, in this case the Chief Security Officer, Brady, and his team as they embark on a digital transformation of stacked corporations' overall business. Through the lens of that Chief Security Officer and the CSO's office, we're going to cover a number of different topics across several modules of this course. In Module A, you'll configure and deploy your OpenShift cluster on the IBM Technology Zone. In Module B, you'll familiarize yourself with the challenges of security in the era of hybrid multi-cloud computing. In Module C, we'll go hands-on with security context constraints, SCCs, and Red Hat OpenShift. In Module D, you'll be digging deeper into the concepts and the terminologies around SCCs. And in Module E, you'll deploy applications with customized security contexts, or SCs, and using YAML manifests. In F, you'll visualize and dissect SCCs. In G, you'll be reintroduced to our personas of Brady and Amy, our Chief Innovation Officer from Part 1. In Module H, you'll cover how SCCs and permissions work together, and in I, you'll follow that up with how you create and assign SCCs. In J, you'll use predefined versus customized SCCs and examine the differences, and in K, you'll validate SCs using SCCs. Finally, in our last two, we'll create a deployment using accounts and SCCs, and in our appendix, we'll wrap up and talk about next steps for your learning. Keep in mind that accreditation of a Level 3 course like this one is more nuanced than you might be familiar with from a Level 2 or a Level 1 course. The details for IBM Sellers, Technical Sellers, and our partners and how they're accredited are provided in the following slides that accompany this documentation. All modules contain within them recordings and narrations, such as this one, delivered to you by your team of authors. Be sure to watch these for a visual demonstration on how to perform these live components. In particular, it's strongly recommended that IBM Sellers and Technical Sellers watch these recordings, as they'll be useful to you as you go about creating and recording your own stand-in delivered presentations as part of your Level 3 accreditation. Hands-on demonstration environments will be provisioned free of charge for you using the IBM Technology Zone. Provisioning instructions are included within the course modules, so check out the documentation before you get started on your learning. Reserve only for the time that you need. These are finite resources, and limiting your time and your reservation ensures that other partners and IBMers can leverage these resources for their own client demonstrations. So just be cognizant of the resources and the level of time that you need to get through the coursework. For the Level 3 certification and accreditation, IBM and business partners need to demonstrate a mastery of the skills learned throughout the various modules of the recordings and the coursework. Level 3 accreditation requirements and the ways that participants are evaluated before receiving their credits differs depending on your job role. For a business partner, you must pass an accreditation quiz after completing the hands-on portion of the course. The quiz contents will contain multiple choice questions with 4 possible answers, only one of which is correct, and you must work through the lab documentation and the coursework in order to identify the answers to those questions. We'll have markers and indicators throughout the lab to make sure that you're being prompted when needed so that you don't have to backtrack and go through the lab a second time when it comes time to get credited and certified. IBM Sellers and Technical Sellers need to develop and record a stand-in deliver presentation. This video is intended to simulate your delivery of a live demo in front of a customer on camera. IBMers will have the flexibility in defining their hypothetical client, the pain points that the client might be running through, and the goals that they ultimately aspire to. The recording will then cover the seller's hands-on demonstration and pitch to the client of the value of the IBM solution using the environments and the techniques that we're going to cover in this lab. Specific valuation criteria are covered on the charts and the documentation that accompany this video. In terms of the overall valuation criteria, IBM sellers are expected to articulate the client's pain points and the value proposition of using Red Hat OpenShift to solve those problems. They also need to highlight the use cases for Red Hat OpenShift that we'll talk about throughout this coursework. The seller needs to demonstrate and discuss several of the key differentiated capabilities OpenShift brings atop of other competitors in the marketplace. So focusing on the value proposition and the value derived from the solution will be key to your stand and deliver presentation. Fourth, sellers highlight the benefits to the client. So this is the way that the client can't live without those benefits that were included in the previous section. The sellers need to highlight the benefits to the client's own customers. So not only how the client benefits, but from those downstream of the client's solutions. The seller also needs to close out the demo with a call to action for the customer. And that might include something like a workshop, a deeper dive into a product meeting, an MVP engagement, or something along those lines. In terms of prerequisites, please ensure that you prepared and reviewed the following before embarking on this coursework. First is to request access to the IBM Technology Zone, which as an IBMer or business partner, you very likely already have access to. Just make sure that you can log in and authenticate using your IBM credentials. You'll also want access to an IBM Cloud account, so go to cloud.ibm.com and sign up there. That is the same account that you'd be likely using to log into both IBM Tech Zone and IBM Cloud. You also need a web browser and a terminal if you're on Mac, or something like PuTTY or some equivalent of an SSH console on a Windows machine. The following instructions will give you step-by-step procedures on how to reserve your cluster through the IBM Technology Zone. Please do keep in mind, if you're watching this recording, that likely in the future revisions will be made to the type of environment or the steps used to provision that environment. IBM Tech Zone is frequently updating their user interface, as well the number of resources and where those resources are found or what they are labeled as continuously change on the IBM Tech Zone. So very likely from the time that I've recorded this video, steps will have changed, and for that reason, I strongly encourage everyone to follow the instructions documented in either the PowerPoint or PDF version of your documentation, and just use this simply as an illustrative video, but not a verbatim step-by-step instruction guide of how you should provision at the time that you go to do this lab. If this is your first visit to the IBM Technology Zone, you first need to agree to the terms and conditions before accessing the environment and resources. Scroll down the page until you reach Environments, and then on that tile you should see a blue Reserve button. From the two reservation options, select Reserve Now, unless you're planning to make use of the environment at a much later date. Otherwise, use the default reservation period, which will be for approximately 7 days, which is more than enough to complete the coursework associated with this hands-on lab. When ready, click Submit to proceed. Assign a unique name to your reservation. Set the purpose to practice or self-education. Add a purpose description, one set to something of your liking. Set your preferred geography to a data center which is located most closely to where you're going to be taking this lab work. Set the end date and time to approximately 7 days ahead of the current date. You can set it for less if you feel like you will require less time, or for more if you expect that you'll require more time. However, in general, 7 days should be more than sufficient to complete the work. Select the deployment pattern to OpenShift 4.10 on Power 9, or a later version of OpenShift if it's available. Click the Check Availability button near the bottom of the page to determine if resources are on hand for this environment. Wait until a green checkmark appears, or if it doesn't, change your reservation period for a time that doesn't create an error or lack of availability. When ready, click Submit to finalize your reservation. After submitting your reservation request, you'll be directed to a thank you page giving you instructions to wait for the environment to be provisioned before moving on with your lab work. Typically, this takes about 1 to 2 hours, but results may vary depending on the resource availability to the tech zone at the time that you booked your environment. Large classes taking this course for education purposes are advised to reserve environments well ahead of the training time to ensure that your demo environment can be stood up in time and that there's sufficient resources for everyone to have their own environment for the lab. You can track the status of your reservation by clicking the My Reservations button from the drop-down at the top of the page as shown on your documentation. If the reservation shows as scheduled or provisioning, it's still in the process of being deployed. Wait until the status shows as ready before attempting to access the environment. You can refresh this page in your browser periodically while awaiting the status change. Also note that you'll receive an email directly to your IBM Cloud account from the IBM Technology Zone when you're ready to use that environment. So rather than refresh the page, you can simply wait on that email to come through, and that email will include instructions on how to access the project kit page, which is how you get started with your environment. Once you've received the email or the page on the IBM Tech Zone shows your environment as ready, dive into the environment via the project kit URL, which will open a new page for the project kit, which is shown in the video and in your documentation. That project kit page contains all the details that you need to know in order to connect to the Red Hat OpenShift cluster, either through a web interface or through a remote SSH terminal. Under the Offering Information header, record the account and password as shown. These will be needed to authenticate with your OpenShift cluster. Additional details about your environment are summarized in the headers below that Offering Information header. You can use this information to work programmatically with Red Hat OpenShift if, for example, you want to interact via APIs or via an SSH console like we'll be doing later in this lab. For the purposes of this lab, we'll be working primarily with the web interface, and you'll be instructed on when to connect and how to connect via SSH at a later point in time. For now, connect to the web-based management console by clicking on the URL as indicated in your documentation. Once your web browser has been directed to the OpenShift Container Platform login page, you'll find that there are two options for login, either kubeadmin or htpassword. Select the second option, which is the htpassword button. Enter the credentials provided to you that you gathered earlier from the Project Kit page and use those for authentication. Your username should be set to CEC user, and the password is the string supplied on your Project Kit page. When you're satisfied and ready, click Login, and you'll be directed to the OpenShift Container Platform web interface dashboard. With that, your Red Hat OpenShift environment is now online and ready for self-education and demonstration purposes. Of important note for our business partners is that there are on-screen prompts that appear throughout the lab instructions with call-out boxes and other types of indicators as to information that should be recorded as part of your accreditation quiz questions that you'll be used to certify at the end of the coursework. So if you do see those prompts on screen or in your documentation, make sure to either take a screenshot or record the information, as that will be vital to you in your test out at the end of this lab work.